Okay, we got it. So good morning. So thanks everyone for coming together for our first meeting of a working group on the Kensington Paths. We've invited a number of folks, some stakeholders. I don't think everyone's here because some could not make it, like Linda Lipscomb said she could not make it. So I think though, respecting everybody's time, we will start, and we will also record these meetings, and we'll have minutes as well. So for those who may miss it, you could get filled in from others, and we'll have a chance for everyone to introduce themselves. We have, I know, folks from the community as well as from the county. So we'll get going, and everyone should have received also a couple of new documents this morning, which we'll just briefly go over, and also should have should have gotten the original document email invite that has the agenda for today's meeting. So I wanted to first start by just thanking all of you for being interested in serving on this, and I know also to the Paths group that's really worked so hard on this issue, and others who really care about this issue. And I appreciate also the background and help of Public Works as well as County Council. So let me just pull up my agenda and just say, my goal is to make this a meaningful process. So with the ultimate goal of creating public ownership for the paths in a way that makes sense for the community, that can fill multiple objectives, and having input obviously of all of you and how we go about doing this. So I won't go into too much other than, we set up this working group to not just bring in people who've been dealing with the paths for a fair amount of time, but also others who really are interested in this issue and can help provide direction. When I originally talked about establishing this work group and also sent a letter to the Community Services District, we had thought through what would the role of this group be. And I think the email to all of you sort of had 6 bullet points. One is identify which paths are worthy of public ownership and public use. Second, to develop a plan to survey the paths which are intended to be transferred to the county. Third, develop cost estimates for capital improvement and ongoing maintenance of the paths to be transferred to the county. Identify the legal options to transfer ownership of the paths to the county. Identify the various funding options available to improve and maintain the paths, which ultimately will involve approval by the voters of Kensington, and develop a timeline for action. So we can talk if there needs to be any change on that, but that was the original thinking. So I thought a quick way to start would be self-introductions and a really brief statement by everyone here about what interested you in the path, what's been your role with the paths, or what interests you about them, and what your desired outcome is for this effort. We'll start with that, and then I will get to our Public Works and County Council and have them introduce themselves as well. So I'll call out, because on the screen, this will make it maybe easy. But I'll start with, why don't I start with Rodney and Sarah, since you've been so involved in this and you're up in Portland. So Rodney and Sarah.
Yeah, Rodney.
And of course, you'll be making a brief presentation later, so you'll know that.
Yeah, so Rodney Paul, I'm on the steering committee of the Path Keepers. I love walking on the paths, and I kind of love the idea of having a very walkable community. So my goal is public ownership of the paths so that we continue to have access to them.
I'm Sarah Paul, and I'm on the board of KIC, the Kensington Improvement Club, and also a steering committee member for the Path Keepers. I also use the paths every day, and I'm looking forward to public ownerships of the paths so that we can maintain and improve them for all to enjoy in the community.
Thanks. Kevin Padian from the Fire Board.
That's it. I'm from the Fire Board, and my interest is mainly in the possible use of the paths during evacuations and emergency, and also as access for emergency personnel in a more practical way in some situations.
Great. Thanks, Kevin, and thanks for agreeing to being part of it. Denise Van Kuyken?
Yes, I was born and raised in Albany and spent many years walking in the paths in Berkeley and Kensington. And now I'm blessed to live in Kensington and on the Coventry Path, and have enjoyed it immensely and see what a tremendous benefit it is to not just the Kensington community, but also we seem to have a lot of visitors who like to walk our paths and explore our community. So I think it's a great public service for many.
Great, thanks. Sylvia Ellsbury?
Hi. My house for 23 years, well, it's been here longer than that, but I've been in it for 23 years, is near the upper terminus of one of the paths that has not yet been named, but which is very frequently used. And like Kevin, I'm interested in the emergency potential of it. I've trained my children and dogs to flee our burning home down the path. And I'm also the president of the KCC, but I don't know that that's relevant here. I'm just throwing it out there as my community cred.
You have community cred. We just always want to know if any affiliations, you're free to mention any affiliations they wish, right? Mark Aldenberg?
Hi, I'm Mark Aldenberg. I'm a homeowner for 40 years in Kensington. I live on path number 9, also known as Beloit Path. And I'm a member of the Path Keepers Steering Committee. And living along a path and having worked on improving it, and enjoy many neighbors and friends who go up and down the path every day. I see the benefit of the paths on a daily basis. And I'm interested in all things to do with the paths. One little tidbit is we have this big Mark Bullwinkle gate on the path that you might come up and check out sometime. It's a fabulous piece of art along the paths.
Great, thanks, Mark. Lisa Corona?
Yes, good morning, everybody. I am also on the Path Keepers Steering Committee. I'm on the board of KIC with Sarah as well. And I'm also on the Emergency Preparedness Committee with the Fire District. So all of these things tie together related to the paths and the use of the paths for evacuation and for recreational purposes and enjoyment of the whole community. I think I got involved in this because as the previous parks director for the city of Berkeley and the deputy city manager, there's so many paths there. And when I found out that the Kensington Paths were not owned by a public agency and that they had deteriorated and had been blocked over time, it was really a travesty that I thought needed protection. And I've been working on public ownership ever since.
Thanks, Lisa. Gabriel Rogan?
Hi, everybody. Gabriel, I've lived here for about 8 years in Kensington and always wanted to just find a way to give back to the community. And this is my first chance to do it. So I'm just happy to be here. Don't have any real strong desired outcome other than I love using the paths and I hope we can just keep them accessible for everybody.
Great. Danielle Madugo, if I pronounced it right, hopefully.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. My name's Danielle Madugo. I'm a Kensington resident of, I think, 6 years. I'm also on the Emergency Preparedness Committee under the Fire Board and a homeowner along the, I think it's the Westminster Path between Westminster and Highland. And I know my neighbors along our path as well. So I'm kind of coming to represent us getting our path owned by Kensington and maintained by Kensington. Our path itself has had other issues in the past, but I've also, it's very steep and I've slipped down it myself. So it needs some rehab, and people tend to use our fence, which I don't mind them using, but at the same time, that's a liability for us. I don't want anyone to get hurt. And also I am interested in the use of the paths for evacuation. We walked down public path number 6, which I think maybe Arlington Path or Kenyon Path. And that gets overgrown quite a bit sometimes. So although it's in great condition relatively, and that's my interest is evacuation, safety, and Kensington ownership of the paths.
Great, thanks. Paul Doro?
So we've lived in Kensington for 40 plus years and have walked Kensington, Berkeley Hills and made use of all the paths, almost all of them that are accessible. So having them walkable and available for exercise and recreation is one goal. Also at various times over the years, I've been a kind of a bit player in efforts to get first KPP CSD and now maybe a new district to step up to the question of who actually owns the paths and how can we go about improving them and maintaining them, not just for exercise and recreation, but also I think living near the what we call the York Steps that connect the cul-de-sac on York Avenue with Arlington as a very real evacuation route. So those are my interests.
Great. Thank you, Paul. David Spath?
I'm Dave Spath. I'm also in the steering committee of the Path Keepers, also a board member of KPOA and also the Emergency Preparedness Committee of the Fire District. I've lived in Kensington for about 40 years. I've used the paths extensively, very much interested in seeing them being acquired so that they're owned publicly. Recreation is an important factor throughout the community, and the paths provide a great deal of recreation. And also, as others have said, emergency preparedness and emergency using them for emergencies and leaving the community is a very important factor as well.
Thank you. So with that, I'm going to maybe turn to Jerry. Why don't you have your Public Works folks, introduce themselves. I'll turn it over to you to do that, and then Tom. So Jerry Fahey from Public Works.
Good morning. Yeah, Jerry Fahey. I'm with the Public Works Department in our Transportation Engineering Division. And I will move it over to Jocelyn and let her introduce herself as well as Anchor CM, and then we'll finish up with Tom Geiger.
Hi, I'm Jocelyn Laroff with Engineering Services Division that oversees both the surveys, the permit center, and our special district section. So, and then currently I have been appointed the point of contact for Public Works, so coordinating with Jerry. And then just wanted to introduce Jason Chen. We brought Anchor on board. So with Jason Chen, and then he can introduce himself. But just to let you know, he has a wealth of knowledge on the path as part of the city of Orinda. He was a city engineer. And so he knows all about paths and maintenance and acceptance and all that. So for Jason.
Hello everyone, my name is Jason Chen. I'm with Anchor CM. We're here to assist Jocelyn with this effort, and along with me from Anchor Engineering, we also have Larry Thies. Larry Thies is our president of the company, and he's also, before joining Anchor CM, he was the assistant city manager as well as the director of public works for City of Orinda. And Orinda also has the similar situation, so we're familiar with this type of situation. And thank you very much.
So Larry, did you want to introduce yourself?
I think Larry was having a little difficult time with the technical. Okay. He can hear, but
we appreciate having Larry and Jason on board, because I know, and especially bringing in some extra expertise and with Orinda. And as Jocelyn said, Jocelyn will be the point of contact. She's great. So I know she will be our contact. And I'll have Robert Rogers in my office, who's my staff person for Kensington. Robert?
Thank you, John. Robert Rogers, John's aide on Kensington issues. Great to see you all.
And you're going to ride your bike up the paths, I know, right? Right.
Looking forward to using the paths alongside you.
Yes, right. So
just before you go on, Supervisor, we skipped over Tom Geiger.
Oh, Tom, we can't forget the lawyer who's telling us how to do stuff. Tom, a former reporter, now a lawyer. So Tom.
Right. I'm Tom Geiger. I'm an assistant county counsel. Our office is the legal advisor to the Board of Supervisors, and one of my clients is the Public Works Department. So I give public advice to them and to the board and to John.
So, you know, for the lawyers on here, you know that lawyers can either be can-do people or no can-do people, and Tom's a can-do person. Larry, now that you're on, Clara, with Sather Gate in the background, it looks like, or a gate on UC Berkeley's campus. So you want to just introduce yourself quickly? I recognized your name. I knew your name when you came on. Oh, you're muted.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me now. I apologize. I was getting my computer set up, but I was listening the whole time because of the conference line. So it's good to hear from everyone. And yes, Jason introduced me. I would just say that Jason and I are very familiar with these situations. It's very common in a lot of the subdivisions of that era. Orinda, developed, in the same time frame before it incorporated, has these very similar features and similar complications. And we've had to, in the last year, had to deal with one before we left Orinda. They are complicated, but I think it's an important resource for everyone. And we're happy to help however we can and bring our expertise to the project. Thank you.
And there was a question by Kevin Padian about who Anchor CM is officially, and my understanding is their consultant that the county has brought on to assist in this effort. Is that correct, Jerry?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I will, just to be totally transparent, we have to maybe we'll just also add that both Larry and Jason have former Contra Costa County Public Works experience, both in our transportation and engineering services divisions. So they come with not only knowledge of the small agency and dealing with it in Orinda, but also how the county operates.
Yeah, and just a brief comment. So, the county is expending resources in this effort, and that's the reason I sent you. I don't think we need to go through it, but one of the documents we sent you is an item going to our board meeting on March 1. I think I had mentioned that the county had about $100,000 in park dedication fees. What we do in the county is this is under state law and county ordinance, when a new home is built, there are fees collected for capital planning and capital for park and park type resources. And what we do is we maintain those funds for the same basic zip code area in which the money was collected. So for example, in unincorporated El Sobrante, there is a fund. In unincorporated North Richmond, in Kensington, and cities do the same. Cities collect these funds the same way, and they are used to benefit the community from a park resource standpoint. So we had accumulated there is, very, very little new development in Kensington of new homes. We accumulated over many years a park dedication fund paid by the applicant or the developer who built their home. And that is reserved in a fund for park type resources in the community. So we have about $106,000, nearly $107,000, and the Board of Supervisors is going to allocate, at my recommendation, about $100,000 to be held for this project, and that includes planning, could be design, the surveying. And so that's what has allowed us to really try to look at this professionally, thoroughly. And so that's the funding that we're expending. And I assume the consultant will be paid from these funds, as will survey work or other work that needs to be done, and design work. And that's the purpose of that funding. So that I just wanted to show you, it's going before our board to allocate those dollars. So with that, the next item on our agenda was really to have the Kensington Path Keepers group since they've been doing a lot of work on this, Although I will pull out while you're speaking, Rodney and whoever else is going to speak, the book on Kensington that does mention the history of the paths. Rich, I do have the book here in my office. And so the paths have been a subject of discussion in Kensington. And I know the Kensington Improvement Club specifically has really looked at, how does this resource get used? So this is an ongoing history. So I will turn it over to Rodney, to you.
Great, thanks, John. I'm going to keep this pretty high level. If you guys don't mind, I'd like to just get through this presentation. It won't, as I said, probably be about 5 minutes, and then we can do questions at the end. So first of all, when we think about the paths, it's important to know the role that they played in Kensington history, which is actually to get people to the key route, light rail lines that would get people to the ferries and then later on to all the way to San Francisco. So when we look at this map of the paths, we can see that these paths were really getting people to Arlington Avenue so they could take light rail and actually you could get to the city pretty quickly when Kensington was first built. In fact, a lot of people thought they wouldn't be using cars. They would actually be using rail transportation as their primary means of getting around. So that's what it was then. Of course, the question is, why are they important today? And it's really, we've already talked about this when we introduce ourselves, escape routes during a wildfire or other emergency, fire department access. So we know during the 1991 Oakland Hills fire, the fire department used a lot of the Berkeley paths. And of course, recreation, we've already talked about that, and then making our community more walkable. Who owns the paths? Well, of course, we're here because there is not public ownership. And the history is that when the developer created the community and did all the lots, they put in paths like this one. This is the Willamette Path. It takes people down to Arlington. So the paths were offered to the county in the survey that was done in 1913, but the county actually never accepted them. And that's kind of why we're in the position we are in today. And then more recently, KPP-CSD did pass a resolution to acquire the paths. So it passed unanimously, but they never really did anything after that and just kind of moved on to dealing with other issues. And so nothing has happened with it since 2012. Why is this public path ownership important? Well, so first of all, it's going to guarantee that the public can have access to these paths. And we'll talk in a moment about 2 paths that are currently blocked by homeowners. And there's not a whole lot you can do about that as long as they're not publicly owned. Grant funding would be possible. I think that's going to be really important to this effort we're talking about. We could apply for funds that would help us gain the money we need. And that would enable us to make improvements and then do ongoing maintenance. And then we would have improved evacuation options if we were able to do that. What condition are the paths in? Well, it varies. So we have 11 total paths. One of them is actually publicly owned, so it's not really going to be part of this discussion, but there's a short path that feeds the Arlington that is publicly owned. 10 are not owned. And when we look at them, first, of course, here's the Ardmore Path. We call this the Champs-Élysées of the paths. It's very, very nicely laid out, and it is well developed and maintained, although it could use some more, maybe some repair work on some of the steps. And this is where it's located. So it's right off of Arlington Avenue, getting people to the shopping district there. The Beloit Path, I know Mark mentioned living on that. Here's that gate he was talking about, by the way. It really is very beautiful. So many improvements have already been made, but more are needed. And here's where that one's located. So it's above the Arlington, and we'd see various different ways that it was improved. The Willamette Path, I think some of you mentioned that, and it was being called like the Arlington or the Kenyon Path, but on our map, we call it the Willamette Path. And there are, as you can see here, some portions that really need repair. We've got some cracking in the concrete, and here's where it's located. It's actually the longest path. And I think Paul mentioned being on one of the cul-de-sacs that's next to it. Stratford Path is one that is passable, but it needs maintenance. There's a lot of growth that occurs, and there have been work parties to clear that growth periodically. Usually there's at least one a year. And then I think, Danielle, you mentioned living next to the Westminster Path, which is dirt, has not been improved at all. And there's also the Martian Path. So those ones are completely dirt. So those are, it really runs the gamut, these different paths. And then we have the two paths that are blocked, the Columbia and the Princeton paths. And this to me is a real shame because these could be really important in an evacuation. They could really get people from places that could be at risk to safer areas. So here's the lower part of the Princeton path. This is actually going right down to Arlington Avenue, but it is completely blocked right now, so people can't use it. How do other Bay Area communities manage their paths? We did a study and looked at Berkeley and Mill Valley, both of whom have publicly owned paths, both have friends groups. So I know Berkeley has the Berkeley, what do we call them? The Path Wanderers, who do fundraising and do a lot of the maintenance. So they have work parties and stuff. And they've really done a tremendous job of that. And Mill Valley has a group like that as well. And they both are looking at the paths as important for evacuation, as well as for recreation and health. And they utilize a variety of construction techniques. So it's not like, the paths are not all going to end up being concrete. There's things you can do. Some of them are going to remain dirt. Some are going to have railroad ties. But these communities are coming up with different ways of approaching the paths. Some of them have rail, some of them don't. But Mill Valley, believe it or not, 175 paths, and this is in some literature from their path group, a map that they have. So that's kind of extraordinary. They have so many of the Dipsy steps being very, very well known. I think the Dipsy steps have been in some films. And then Berkeley has 143 paths. Since we live close by, probably a lot of you take advantage of these paths and know how nice they are. And the Path Wanderers, again, they've done, like some of these things we're looking at are improvements that the Path Wanderers have made. So we are the Kensington Path Keepers, and we're a grassroots group, 5-person steering committee. All of us are on this call right now. We have a 318 member mailing list. So we do have a way of getting out word of what we're doing. We created this map and we distribute map pamphlets. They're available at Raxacol, Coffee and Cheese. Am I getting it right? Mm-hmm. Tea and Cheese on the Arlington and at the Calusa Circle Farmers Market. And then this same app is also available on the Kensington Path Keepers website. So you can just be out walking around and pull up this map. And it's really handy. I think a lot of people like this Martian path, I don't think that many people know about it. It's a little hard to find, but kind of cool. And then some of the other paths. And I know people in like El Cerrito, Berkeley in particular, have made a point of going and finding these paths. Our mission, you've heard us say this already, achieve public ownership of the paths so we can assure access in perpetuity and create these improvements that we're all talking about. So that is my presentation. Does anybody have any questions? Or I should ask also, do any of my fellow steering committee members have anything they want to add to what I just said? Okay, that's it then.
Any questions? And thanks for all of your work and for advocacy on this and the whole Pathfinders group. And just, Rodney, you mentioned about public ownership in Berkeley. How many of the Berkeley paths are in public ownership?
I think all of them are publicly owned. They are, as I said, they are in various states of improvement.
And maybe this is to Lisa, who worked in Berkeley. Which division or department in the city oversaw the paths?
It was really a combination. Public Works Engineering, of course, did all of any improvements. I know Berkeley is trying now to make sure that they have at least one handrail on every path, one side of every path. So they were in charge with the improvement portion as it came up, and approvals for projects that the Path Keepers wanted to do themselves. I mean, the Path Wanderers wanted to do themselves. And the Parks Department organized once a year weed abatement using East Bay, I forget the name of the group, but a corps, like an AmeriCorps group of volunteers. Every summer they put together a team for weed abatement throughout the city, and it included the paths.
And did they have a dedicated funding source, or was it just maintained out of the city's general fund?
It was just maintained out of the city's general fund, and I think they now have some funds through their new kind of wildfire initiative that was just passed. They have a lot of public safety improvements through a big measure that was just recently passed. And some of that, a portion of that money went to repairing a couple of these paths.
Right.
But it's typically pretty minimal annually. You know, I think even the maintenance is like under $10,000 a year, or used to be.
Right. And
for all the
you know,
paths.
a question that comes up a lot, so maybe just putting it out there, is there, you know, some people raise the issue of, oh, what are the liability to the agency that owns it? What's been the sort of experience in Berkeley about claims and liability issues?
Yeah, it's been extremely minimal. And, you know, I think there was one, I have a couple of historical letters from some of the city attorneys. I think there was one time many years ago, like 20 years ago, like a step that was broken on the Marin steps. But other than that, you know, I don't have any definitive information. I haven't gotten any. We tried to call as part of the Pathkeepers research recently in the last few years, and nobody knew of any that we could identify other than that one that was a historical one of a concrete step that had crumbled.
Got it. Hear that, Tom? Not a lot of risk. Isn't that a good thing?
Well, that actually, though, it kind of raises a question I had. So the paths in Berkeley and Mill Valley, you know, have the entities, have they owned those paths for a long time? They didn't, like, since the early 1900s or whenever they were built?
Yeah, I think Berkeley, when they became a city, just took them all on. That's my understanding. I don't know if there are any exceptions. We can certainly ask. I don't know about Mill Valley at all.
Right.
We can always research that, Tom, and get you more information.
Yeah. And I know that John said I'm kind of a can-do person, but I think that's going to be one of the issues is, you know, if they've owned them for a long time, they don't have concerns about things like the Americans with Disabilities Act. But if we're going to be taking over ownership of some of those, that might be a concern. So that's something, you know, we would want to look into.
Yeah, there's been a lot of research on that as well. I know Zach Cowan, who was the deputy city attorney. I don't know if you know Zach, for the city of Berkeley. But he's written memos related to the exemption clauses for situations where ADA cannot be implemented. And so the question would be, to what level can we implement ADA on these steeper steps? For sure.
Right. Yeah. And like I said, I think that's going to be one of the issues going forward.
Yeah, and from my understanding, and I don't, if you have memos, you can get us, Lisa, but it is, and the law may have changed as well, is that there are certain exemptions under the ADA, and so that'll come up as an issue, I'm sure, and I'm sure Larry. It looks like Larry wants to chime in on this. Yeah.
I was just going to add, if you're going into the research with, you know, other agencies, yeah, the timing is pretty critical, like Tom mentioned. But another element we found that you should consider is if they are considered recreational, like trails, there's different immunities for that type of use. It may not quite line up, you know, it could work with ADA, or, you know, it's kind of a yin and a yang. But the other element is the emergency access. That tends to tip it a little bit more toward public access as opposed to recreational trail. So it might be good to understand how other cities define it, because how you define it could reduce the liability issues, or it could trigger different elements to be, you know, installed, like ADA. So if you're already doing the research, I suggest doing that.
Yeah, I think I had heard that discussion at one time, that how you classify it affects your ADA exemption. So that's an important point for us to have a discussion about of it at pretty sooner than later, to think about this, right?
Yeah. So Lisa, if you have access to those Berkeley City Attorney memos, those would be great.
Yeah, I guess I have your email now, if you're on their email list.
Yeah.
So I'll send whatever I have to you.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sure.
And the same with Mill Valley, by the way. Mill Valley's public ownership and run by their Parks Department or Public Works.
They have a friends group called Steps, Lanes and Paths or something like that. And they work through the Recreation Division, the Recreation and Parks Division. However, the funding almost exclusively comes from yet another fire related measure.
Right.
I have notes on that. I talked to the person who was in charge of all that at the fire department and I can send you my notes on that. He, I think, has since retired, but he did this for many, many years. So I do have that information as well. But it's a combination of the fire monies for abatement and evacuation and the recreation department.
Right. Yeah, Kevin made a comment for ADA reasons. You may not want to advertise the paths as evacuation routes. Obviously, they're available. And Orinda, so Orinda took ownership. I know it's only just a couple paths. What were the issues on how they classified them in Orinda?
I think, our experience in Orinda, very similar in types of dedications. I would say they're not as developed as the ones in Kensington and certainly Mill Valley and Berkeley. So most of them were on paper. There were a couple, dirt trail, nothing like with steps or anything. The most recent one we dealt with was basically a connection between two cul-de-sacs. It was supposed to be a through street. Developer, different times, they didn't want a through street. And they basically made a connection between the cul-de-sacs and it leads to an elementary school. And this was actually in the 70s. So it's not even like 100 years ago, like a lot of these other ones. And in that particular case, the city decided to, after a lot of actually closed session discussion, because there's a right-of-way negotiation, they decided to go ahead and accept an easement to over this existing asphalt path. But there was also a storm drain line underneath it and a sewer line. So there was multiple utilities in that corridor as well. So it sort of made it a little bit more of a, not as a complicated, but a more robust public interest there. And so that one's not fully resolved yet, but the intention was to put it in, make minor repairs, nothing that would trigger ADA, to then accept the easement. Because yes, a few of the property owners had threatened to close it because of their liability concerns of people going through there, because they were starting to have trip and fall hazards along the asphalt. So the project was essentially to just grind out the tree roots that are kind of uplifting and then just slurry seal it without doing the minimal amount where it did not trigger ADA. That was the approach that the city wanted to go with. The cost for ADA wasn't exorbitant, but it certainly added to it, and it had impacts on the surrounding property owners that they didn't want to. It was negotiated that it wasn't in their interest to have that as well. So that's the recent case with Orinda.
Thank you. All right. Sorry, Rodney, you were going to say something?
Oh, no, I'm good.
Okay.
John, could I just make a
Yes.
couple?
Oh, sure.
quick
Yeah, David. Yeah.
One with regard to Berkeley, the Path Wanderers also have funding themselves. They get donations, and the last time we chatted with them, they had about $40,000 in donations to maintain the paths. And secondly, Berkeley, in their evacuation or emergency preparedness plan, they actually advertised the paths as evacuation routes, while at the same time cautioning those who have potential disabilities and may be unable to use the paths. They caution them about the difficulties of walking on the paths during an evacuation.
Great. Thanks for that information, David. All right. So, and one comment I'll just make as we get into Public Works and County Council for a second is, Rodney, you showed sort of the resolution by the Community Services District. Yeah, over the years with changing members of their board, there's been varying degrees of interest in pursuing it. And I think most recently, the decision to at least go this route was that there's been a lot of things on their plate, and I think they just felt they didn't have the bandwidth and it was going to take a long time. And so the view was to take this route. I want to say I've always believed personally that the closer to people, the level of government closest to local input is the best way to have the paths. And in I think a perfect world, the community services district would be a good entity to do that. But so far, since they with everything else they're doing, this is not a high priority. The county, I suggest that we step forward to look at this now. There's nothing that prevents, let's say we do all the research and do the surveying to all take this into public ownership with a plan. If at the final end of this process, if the community services district says, well, we're ready, you've done all the preparation work, we'll take the ownership instead of the county. I think that's that's a possibility. We'll see. Ultimately, the voters of Kensington are going to have, whether it's a measure put on the ballot by the community services district, by an initiative, or by the county, the voters of Kensington are going to have to approve, some funding here. So in any event, it comes back to a funding mechanism, and whether it's through the county or ultimately the community services district. But right now, we've been approaching it as if it's to the county. Again, doesn't mean we can't change that direction with this research to different owners. I just wanted to make that point. So with that, going to Public Works, I did, by the way, send out, and because I don't want to get bogged down in some details today, I want it to be higher level sort of review. The county did have a consultant prepare a detailed memo that wasn't finalized, that addresses process and some costs. And I sort of summarized some items in what was sent to you. I actually did this last night just so we would have it. So maybe Jocelyn, without getting into, the real details, you saw what I sent as well, that the county has done an estimate way back in 2007, how accurate all this is today, just know that this was a 2007 estimate. I'm not sure which paths they did and which they didn't. So you may want to talk about that, Jocelyn. And then they looked at what are the different mechanisms. Again, we don't have to decide on any of that now, but this just gives a sense and a flavor for, what are the different mechanisms to establish, to actually own the paths and how to fund any work. So Jocelyn, I'll turn it over to you. And any other things you want to say about the history? I have we have a large file on all of this.
I think some of us also have our files going from transportation to our surveys group, our special districts in my group. So
I inherited the file from the previous supervisor from over 20 years ago and added mine. So, and I know the Path Keepers has a file too.
That's great. That's great, because then our consultant Anchor will put everything together for us and hopefully we'll come up with a plan. So what we have so far, I'm just going to go back till 2007, is when transportation engineering actually did an estimate. So based on Supervisor Joy's, what his handout is detailed there, it was estimated to be 2.8 million for upfront costs to reconstruct. So bringing that back up to current dollars, just estimating like the cost of increases, adjustment, it's going to come to about 4.2. And again, I understand that's just assumption is a concrete path. And I hear that there's interest in other types of paths.
Right. Yeah. Mention the assumption. I think that's important because I don't think there's an interest in doing concrete paths for everything. So can you go through the assumptions generally of what was used for this estimate and which were the paths? It was unclear which paths you didn't cover and which ones you did.
Yeah, so I believe there are more paths that was covered in the map. When I'm trying to pull up a map that we have.
But I think that's an important point when you said it was for concrete, because so this is a really high estimate if you put all of it into concrete, and I don't think that's ultimately what's going to be suggested here. So that's why I say this is just an estimate based on certain assumptions, and we're gonna have to do a whole new estimate, right?
Yes, so we looked at, I guess, 23 path segments originally, our transportation engineering did, and then 12 paths were identified as something that's more viable. And the easy basic assumption, you know, there was just concrete was the thought that was gonna go in, and that was what's costed out, so.
I think what we're gonna probably be asking this working group is, you know, we'll get into this today, is how to prioritize the paths and which ones we should start and focus on, and maybe develop cost estimates for those and have assumptions about what do we want that path to look like? What type of material, what are the priorities? Because this doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing, right? This can be selecting a few paths, working that way. So anyway, that'll all get discussed.
Yes, and then I think that's what we all agree with this work group. We're hoping that we get the priority list and which ones we would are interested in pursuing, what type of improvements, and then refining our cost estimate, right?
And then your maintenance, which was originally 30,000, now saying 45,000, that assumes also concrete paths. So maintenance costs are going to be different
for different types,
different materials, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I didn't want to spend a lot of time on that estimate, but I think it's important for people to know that there was that estimate, but it's probably going to look a lot different today.
It is, and just understand, like, concrete is probably going to be your least maintenance cost down the front, but a lot of upfront costs. But if you're going to go with something, you know, that requires a lot of maintenance, so maybe the improvements to redo maybe less, but to maintain it will probably be more. So it's something to consider.
Right. And one of the points of discussion will also be that I think there's a pretty vibrant volunteer group that will be involved with maintaining paths. So that's, we need to figure ultimately what portion may be maintained by the county or public entity and what portion would be maintained by volunteers. So that's I think that the volunteer efforts are part of the mix here.
Yes, that's a good point. That is a good point that we should consider when we look into the maintenance activity later on. So that's really about the cost estimate and the reconstruction of path. Again, we're going to have to look at it in greater details as part of this work group. Other than that, our surveys group, or let me go through what Supervisor Joya put together, the funding options. There's 3 general funding options that are.
And I added one that we need to address, and I'll get to that. You'll notice, which is the initiative issue that your consultant did not identify, which I know in talking to Tom and others is an option for funding. So I put that on for further research and I'll get to that. Yeah.
Okay. So the funding options, there's the assessment, which one? Oh, Community Facilities District, which.
You can put up if you want to put up that memo, you want to show that? Yeah.
I don't have hosts.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
Yeah. So I think, thank you, Robert.
Barry's on it.
Yeah.
So one is the Lighting and Landscape District.
So Landscape and Lighting District, basically that can fund both the construction and the maintenance. However, the gist is you need simple majority towards the end. Once someone petitions, you will need a simple majority.
Let me be clear, because I think about elections for a living. It's a simple majority of the property owners cast ballots with ballots weighted by assessment amount. So that, just to be clear, because, you know, and it's so ultimately, if every property owner in Kensington is paying the same amount, then their votes are equal. But as you'll see, right, there are some, and Jocelyn may want to talk about this, since there are benefits here, it could be that the property owners who live closer to the path could potentially have a higher assessment than those who live further away, and therefore their vote would mean more than somebody else's vote. So so I just wanted to point that out. Again, no decisions today, but just to understand the lay of the land on the assessment district.
So essentially 3, the landscaping and lighting assessment district. Again, it's a funding mechanism, so it's not an end funding entity. So no board, our board of supervisors would be the one that does it. So, and then again, there's assessment for special and general benefits. So different people can have to pay more versus others that don't. And we would have to think of where the general benefit funding would come from.
Yeah, and so I'm going to inject some of my own political reality into this, is that I think that this may be a more harder approach because, and something we'll talk about is, you know, is also if it's more complex, that you have to, that people will be paying different amounts. I'm not certain how that will go over in Kensington. I think it is best to keep elections simple. So I'm not sure this is the best approach, but it's being identified as an option. So we all see what's on the table. Politically, I think it's a tougher sell. Just because, you know, how do you identify the benefit, and people pay different amounts. So that's just my comment about that approach.
So I think you are correct, Supervisor Joy. I think one of the things that we've been seeing is more of a community facilities district. Again, this is another funding mechanism. So this is a special tax. And this is, all the costs can be charged to the property owners if approved by electorate. So 2/3 of the registered voters. And then there's a rate method that we developed. So the rate method just has to be reasonable. So every parcel within the boundary could pay the same rate. Or it could be based on the land use. So again, it's just going to be the rate method that's reasonable.
And it covers both capital and maintenance.
Correct. Yes. So this is what we see a little bit more being formed more recently. We're doing one right now in a different district that we're forming. And this is the method that we have pursued with the developer. The other one is the community service district. And this is both an entity, which will have to go through LAFCO, so the local agency formation. They would have to approve that entity. And then it's also a funding source. So kind of 2 steps, a little also kind of like the landscaping lighting assessment district, a little bit more complex because you got to go through LAFCO. And then we also have to go through our general public for a simple majority vote.
Wait, hold on. Can you go back? You said simple majority vote.
It could be a combination. So community services district could be both, will require, it's both like a mix of a special tax.
I thought, generally, I know when we've looked at county service areas for others, it's been a 2/3 vote.
Sorry, my notes are wrong then that I'm looking at. So. Okay, 2/3 vote.
Yeah. So here's my question. You're looking on this last point. So the county service area and the community facilities district, which are 2/3. So here's my question. What I put down here, there is a California Supreme Court case that allows initiatives, voter initiatives placed on the ballot. No, I'm sorry. That stays to majority down there. That stays majority. Yeah, that's majority, simple majority. The county service area we were talking about is what is a 2/3. This is what I added. The question I have is how this applies to county service area, and this is maybe to Tom, and community facilities district. There is the Supreme Court ruling that says that initiatives placed on the ballot, tax measures placed on the ballot by initiative, only require a simple majority, not a 2/3. So my question is how that tax measure, can it be used for the county service area or community facilities district to reduce that 2/3 to a majority? So remember, the county service area and the community facilities district are vehicles or mechanisms. The tax is how you tax is this last point, is what vehicles can you use that new taxing method, Tom? So that's my question.
Right, and that's something we would, I think want to look into because, the taxes that the Supreme Court looked at, I mean, it wasn't in conjunction with the formation of some kind of taxing mechanism. It was just kind of a citywide tax. So the entity was already established. I mean, if you're establishing a new kind of funding mechanism, funding structure, and then having a tax go along with that, that's a different situation than what the Supreme Court looked at. So, this is something to look at because you're right. If it is a voter initiative, it only requires a majority, simple majority for a parcel tax.
So if the Kensington Pathfinders organized an effort and did a petition and to put a measure on the ballot, then the question is, does that, can we use that tax revenue from that voter initiative to pay to basically fund either the county service area or the community facilities district? So that legal issue, I think we don't need to resolve, but I think we're going to look into that. My understanding is that what the case said was, if it's not placed on the ballot by the Prop 218 applied to measures placed on the ballot by government, right?
Right.
So that's the legal question to understand. And because obviously I think we are much better off if we can find a vehicle that allows us to have a simple majority vote.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think if it's just an initiative from the citizens to put the tax measure on the ballot for a parcel tax, it does only require a majority vote. The question is if the county at the same time is creating a service area or something.
Right.
So that's something we'll look into with you.
Right. So
I also
we'll
want to mention that the community services district is generally, if we're developing a higher level of service. So the county is already providing some sort of service, and then the community services district will be providing an even higher.
Yeah. So right. So my hunch is the county service area. There are unincorporated communities have created county service areas to put measures on the ballot, like El Sobrante tried it for extra sheriff services. El Sobrante tried it 30 years ago on park services. So my hunch is, again, sort of a political sort of hunch, is that a county service area is probably the vehicle, right? And then the question is it going to be the 2/3 or the majority, right? I mean, I'm trying to keep it simple. We'll research that some more.
Right.
Yeah, Lisa?
Yeah, just one question because I don't know the answer. Is there any possibility of combining this with the existing Zone 21 landscape tax that we already pay and broadening that? That takes care of all the maintenance of the medians, and each household pays $13.66 a year. I mean, is that unrealistic to go there on that?
So the lighting, I believe Zone 21 is the lighting and landscaping district, is an assessment district.
Right.
So that too would have to go with a vote.
Right. But it could expand that existing tax assessment that we all have.
It could. It would follow the similar process with the petition, because you're changing the services and increasing it, and then looking at the rates.
Yeah, okay.
So I think Supervisor Joya alluded to that the Landscaping Lighting District Act was maybe not one that would move forward a lot easier and simpler.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll spend more time talking about these, but we just wanted to get an overview. And Kevin says to fund one of these new districts, he's basically saying, could you take it out of existing ad valorem amounts from the police and fire district? Well, the police and fire district boards would have to vote to fund this. It would be a decision of those boards. We couldn't do it. It would have to be the fire board and police board saying, they could put their own measures on the ballot. It gets to the same issue about how do you do it, but any decisions would involve those boards. We would not be able to just change the ad valorem.
Good to know, because if people balk at a tax for any reason, that was just a question whether there'd be another option.
No, I think that's why ultimately we want to understand what is the ultimate cost going to be, right, to do capital, and what maintenance will be. Are there grant opportunities for any of the capital that then lowers what we need? So I think that's all the kind of good discussion to have. So I do want to get us into sort of what the next steps in the survey and what the work of this working group can be. Did you need to add anything? Who's going to talk about what needs to be done on surveys, maybe on surveys and the transfer process? Should Jocelyn and just if you can either both briefly cover that, then we want to get into sort of how we move forward. So the survey work and then the transfer work, right?
I feel like I need to share the wealth with my consultants since we brought them on board, but so survey work, our surveys actually did some work to look at some of the paths, not all of the paths, and they have did find as as the Kensington Path keepers have information on already, as well as the police, the fire district, is most of them have been dedicated via map. It's an old map, but they were dedicated on a public. So something we have to consider. They did not look at some of the paths, and a few of them, I believe 3 of them, that would need to be really looked at because it was not dedicated on a map. So that would look at really title research. So that's what I know of what our surveys has done. And then I see Larry's.
Well, I think, the perspective I would, kind of talk to the group about was, I think everyone here is very honestly, invested in the paths. They feel there's a benefit. And usually that's the case when we're dealing with a particular group, and you guys are very organized already, compared to some other, sometimes it's just neighbors wanting it. I think from what we've seen so far, I think the surveys department in the county, Jim Stein, has done, and he's the resource I go to when we went through Orinda. I liken it to, not every one of them were dedicated. A fair amount were, but aside from the one path that was identified, it's pretty clear the rest were either never dedicated or never accepted, which is very typical. It's a very standard language that you have to think in 1913, when a lot of these maps were being done, it's all on paper, being hand drawn, and you're approving a map with a dedication on it, but usually the improvements are not built right at the time of the map. They start by subdividing. And so it's very typical, even today, for the county to accept the map itself, but not all the dedications until later. It's done by a separate action. Once the road is done and everything looks fine, then you accept it. Same thing with a path or a storm drain line or any of these things. So it's very common. And I liken the situation to, I do think Jim has done the research. So I honestly don't think there's a lot more effort you should spend in trying to see if the public already accepts it. I think you have the person who would be looking for it. I liken it to, it's a needle in the haystack, and you don't know if the needle is in there for sure. You can spend all day looking through 100 years worth of records trying to find the county acceptance of that path. It's probably not there. It wasn't the case in Orinda either. We went as deep as you can go in the without literally going page by page. So I think the next step I would suggest is, as Supervisor Jory kind of said at the very beginning, you do have to have some prioritization here, because you have a limitation on funds. I mean, that's the reality here, is that, not only of our time and working on these things, but also in the long term of, there has to be some revenue source to address this. These were never maintained by the county or any entity. So this is a new facility even though it's been there physically, it is a new facility that the county has to address. And there has to be some, and this is where we always get into these issues of, you know, I had to deal with private roads in Orinda. Once you're taking a new facility in, you know, the county has to cover all those costs. So I would suggest, you know, our team work with the path keepers to look at the paths and definitely develop a prioritization of the ones of most importance to least importance, or ones that have, frankly, more the least path of resistance versus, you know, because there may be property owners who don't particularly want paths next to their houses, and that's the case that we run into. So if we can at least get prioritization, doesn't mean we're not going to do all of them. It just means, okay, where can we go? And some of them may be lower hanging fruit than others to not only survey, to understand. I think that will help start to craft what ultimately you're going to get is some cost amount. And, you know, like the numbers that we're throwing about are older, those type of things. So that's where I would like to start on this effort and to help organize it. I know it's been, you know, going many years, but we want to get to a point where we can have a definitive, like, here's the possibility, this is what you get. And then obviously the voters at some point, or, you know, the agency, the county has to decide, okay, can we make this decision at this point? So, you know, that's how I viewed it. That's how we viewed it on the Rindo ones. And hopefully, you know, we can work together in trying to achieve that.
Rodney?
Yeah, we've been thinking along the same lines that we really want to come up with some selection criteria for, you know, choosing like 2, 3, maybe, you know, 1, but like paths that are really, like you said, low hanging fruit. Seems like we would want to put together a subcommittee from this group that would come up with the criteria and then bring it back to this group, and then make sure that everyone, you know, we're all agreeing on what those criteria would be. But I think that might be a good next step, is to start looking at what the criteria are for selecting these paths.
And presumably you'll be in contact with neighboring property owners, because obviously I think, you know, proceeding with paths where there's support by neighboring property owners would be important, as opposed to property owners adjacent to the paths who may not be in support.
Yeah, that's a key criteria. I would agree.
Yeah, Lisa. Yeah.
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. I completely agree with using the work that Mr. Stein has done. It was fabulous as a kind of a base. I also wanted to say, mostly I think maybe for Tom and the other staff, that the path keepers have created kind of a log of historical use of the paths that go beyond 1972, because that's a critical date in terms of the establishing public use period. And we'll be happy to share those as well to move any acquisition pieces forward in that regard.
I think that would be helpful for our consultants, as Jason and Larry. But so once we identify the land rights, and generally what Larry was saying is a lot of these before acceptance is we, you know, once you have the priority list and identify the low hanging fruit, talk to the adjacent property owners of what we're doing, there's a community buy-off, right? Then you have identified what type of improvements. Usually the ownership doesn't transfer to the public agency until all the improvements are complete and the funding mechanism to maintain it is in place. So once all those I feel like those are the hard hurdles to get through. The acceptance piece is not that difficult because improvements are up to code. The funding mechanism is in place for perpetuity. And then it's just and if the offers of dedication or right of way or the easements are already there on the map or separate instrument, it's a matter of taking a board action. It seems down the road though, down the road.
Okay. So I think, anything else, Tom or Jocelyn, you wanted to add on this before? I thought we'd have a discussion next ultimately about prioritization.
Yeah, just really quick. I mean, once you kind of prioritize and figure out which paths would be the ones you want to go after first. At some point, you'll want to get a title report too to find out who has ownership interests in those paths. I think that'll be a step you'll want to do. And then, there's kind of three ways, since the county doesn't own any of these paths, there's, I think, three ways to get ownership of them. Can be a voluntary quitclaim to the county from all property owners. You can do a negotiated purchase, which you probably want to get an appraisal at some point. And then there's always the option of eminent domain, which is kind of a last resort and can be expensive and involves litigation.
Who's the negotiation with? When you say negotiated purchase, from who?
And that's why you do the title report, to see who has ownership interest in the pathways.
Yeah,
And
we found that,
Sorry.
in some cases, technically the land right was still with the developer from 1913 in these maps. So, technically it would be, whoever's their successor, you may have to do like a quiet title action is another way to approach it. But I think when we start looking at the physical prioritization, like which ones people like to use the most, which ones are most well developed, then we'll get more into the paperwork prioritization of, well, which neighbor doesn't like these, which ones have some dedication versus not. Those would be the other factors you would consider in the prioritization. But we could start with the physical. I think is the easiest one, and then we can say, okay, well, if these are the top three, and I'm not saying we're going to preclude any of them. I understand a lot of times people get concerned, like, well, are we already cutting down on the list? I think you just have to understand what the list entails, and there's always, in my opinion, there's going to be higher use ones and there's lower use ones, and ones that are easier to get than others. And we just have to be realistic about it and somewhat systematic. Otherwise, you end up spinning your wheels a lot in trying to get everything in. So what I'm hoping with this committee is that we all agree that we're not throwing anything out. We just need to do some priorities so we get understanding from everybody, and truly really understand what everyone's looking at. Like some people like a particular path versus another. We don't know that right now, and we need to have that information. Otherwise, we're working on something that no one really wants or doesn't feel as important. So I think those are the main reasons I want to go through this process. That way we can just go step by step to deliver you a good actionable report that, at the end has a possibility of being done. It may not work if the voters don't agree or whatever the cost ends up being, but, we've at least made the best effort to get something presentable that everyone can, say, hey, are we going to do this or not?
So what do you do in the situation where, let's say, the path today is not in the same place it was in the offer of dedication? I mean, obviously, so when we survey a prioritized path, are we surveying where it's located now compared to where it may be originally identified? And then, assuming we want to move forward with that, we're making a new definition for where the path is, so it may not interfere because it may have shifted with a neighboring property owner. I mean, those issues may come up, right?
It's possible. I think, I think there's inevitably some things no one knows exactly where the paper shows it. They kind of see what's been laid out. Those, spending time on topographic or boundary surveys adds money. So we want to be limited in how much we send out a crew to physically mark spots. We would try to identify a lot just by aerial maps, but also by talking to the neighbors to a certain degree. If you have a neighbor that's fairly, agreeable, doesn't have an issue with the way it's set up already, and it's already kind of slightly going on their property, you would have to probably, do some kind of land acquisition with that particular property owner. But at least that property owner isn't going to fight you. But if you do have one that's going to fight you, then you have to consider, the way you're going to potentially get that piece is from eminent domain, which is much more costly, and I would say drops you much further down on the priority. And so you have to, we would look at those. We try to do as much in the physical field as we could without getting a surveyor with a rod out there and, adding quite a bit of cost. But essentially, at some point, yes, you will have to do that, especially if you're going to do improvements to the path. You'll need that topographic survey to be able to design something for the improvements.
And you'll also need the survey just to get the legal description of the property.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Kevin?
Thanks, John. Larry, thank you very much. This question could be stupid, but I just want to know if a landowner is deliberately blocking the paths, or if we're looking to block paths that clearly have been blocked for some time by landowners, how does this change the picture? I mean, does it then make, is there a violation that then can be used to, I don't mean seize or overtake or eminent domain, or I don't know, but whether you could forcibly open the paths if they're being willfully blocked?
Well, I would say this, Kevin, is that if the county, like we figured, doesn't have any land rights there, then the county or the government agency doesn't really have an ability to enforce anything. It's private property. There are separate, I'm not an attorney, Tom can probably answer better, or other land use attorneys could answer this better, is that as a property owner within the subdivision, you also have a right, because when you purchase your property, you get your title report, you say your lot's here, you get sort of rights to what's in that map as well. So you can exert your landowner rights that say, hey, when I bought this, I think there's a path that I could utilize. That's part of the benefit. Now, that's essentially between landowners at that point. And, it's complicated. I'll just put it as very complicated. We would probably want to identify, is the path important, and then talk to the property owner first. You start there, and then you kind of assess the situation, then move forward on getting the title report, because essentially maybe the path is really considered easement, right? But the easement was never accepted either. So technically the land is the property owner's, and if there was never a use there, then you might not win in court, but there's a lot of factors, and I'm not an attorney, but those are things that commonly come up. We dealt with this exact situation in Rinda where there was never a path that was established, and the city never accepted it, or the county prior to incorporation never accepted it. And we had a property owner uphill that wanted their kid to walk down through, essentially through the side yard of the downhill neighbor, because it was a much quicker shortcut than going all the way around on the street. And we're like, we cannot get in this battle because the bottom, the property owner below had blocked it off. They just thought it was their yard. It probably has been that way ever since they bought the house. They didn't know any different. But we had this one property we kept pushing. We got a land use attorney, and we just said, look, you can go after, but the city is not going to accept it. We didn't feel it was something that was needed for us, because we also didn't want to get into the entanglement that was involved. So hopefully that answers the question.
Oh, that's perfect. Thanks very much.
Since we're coming up on 11:30, I wanted to be clear about what we need to do before the next meeting. It sounds like the major thing that needs to be done is to come up, maybe this subgroup, to come up with criteria about prioritizing the paths. And because it seems that right, we need to define that before determining what work to do. Jocelyn, is there anything else you wanted to say, or Tom? I'm trying to move us toward this 11:30 time here.
No, I think you've covered all the points that were on your agenda.
Yeah. So Rodney suggested a work like a committee. I think that makes sense. So who would actually be on that, and how long would it take to sort of, I mean, do you actually want to come up with criteria and then maybe a recommended list of paths that you think meet that criteria, bring that back here for some larger discussion, rather than just develop criteria. I think, this committee can also look at applying that criteria to the path and come back with, the ones we really would want to begin our work on.
That sounds good to me, John.
So who wants to be on that? Who wants to be on that committee? Who wants to do it? Okay, Rodney, Denise, who else? Lisa. Again, we'll all get a chance to talk about it when it comes back here. David. So sounds like you'll spend some time on the both criteria and actual looking at which paths meet that criteria. And I clearly, you'll look at what are the paths that are most important from a community perspective, but also which ones have supported neighboring property owners, right? I think that's essential. How long do you think that'll take?
I hope we can meet soon, and I can get an email out to the people who have volunteered within the next 24 hours and maybe do a doodle poll and figure out when are good times for us to meet. I think it's fine for us to meet on Zoom. That makes it a lot easier for people to attend.
I think it would be great if we had more of the citizens that haven't been so involved with the Path Keepers also volunteer to work with the Path Keepers and kind of broaden our scope and our input from the community. I think that would be really helpful.
So anyone else, right? Anybody else who's in that category? Danielle?
Yeah, we see Danielle.
Okay, great. Okay.
Sylvia, Gabriel, anybody else?
Gabriel,
Yes?
great, thanks.
Yeah, that's
And Mark Aldenberg.
Mark
Cool.
and Gabriel. Okay, you got a large group. So you'll set that up. Well, do you need Robert at it or anyone else, or you just be you guys will be?
I think we're good. Okay. Robert, be welcome. I have a paid Zoom account, so we can do my Zoom meeting.
And so it sounds like, and then when should we regroup here? And is there anything that we need to have done from Public Works, or obviously legal will look more into this initiative issue. I think, right, Tom, that'll be sort of a follow-up. I can go on a parallel track. Is there anything else that needs to be done by Public Works, or should we wait until we hear back?
I think having the list would help us. So when we can look at what our surveys and Jim Stein has looked at, as well as our transportation engineering. So, because that helps us prioritize, right?
And Rodney, do you need anything from Public Works?
I'm not sure. Lisa, I think Lisa has something she wants to say.
I was just going to say, I think before the subcommittee comes back, it would be really good to either have someone in Public Works as part of that subcommittee, so we have the full criteria looking kind of from all perspectives, or we can just send it to Jocelyn after we kind of develop preliminary criteria, and then you can comment from that, or to whoever you tell us, to Larry or Jocelyn, and
Jason is,
if there's anything missing that we're looking at before we get to our next meeting. And then I think it'd just be important to schedule the next meeting now as well. So.
Yeah, Jocelyn, what do you think?
We're welcome. We have Jason and Larry. That's why they brought them on. We brought them on to help facilitate, right? And they're very familiar with, they can either help develop their criteria with you guys and brainstorm, or to me, it seems like you all know the paths really well. Okay. And already, I get the feeling you know which ones you want already, right? So I feel like you have your numbers, and then if you send that to us ahead of time, and then we can always regroup with Jason and Larry before we meet with Supervisor Joya, right, to refine it.
So the committee will look at criteria paths, send that over to Public Works and us, so that the Public Works will have a chance to look at it and their team look at it before we have our next meeting.
Yep.
Okay. So that's to Jocelyn and to Robert and John. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And then we can set up the next meeting after we get that material from you and have Public Works look at it, and then set up another meeting.
Don't you think it'd be good to have a meeting tentatively scheduled like a month from now to keep this moving?
We could, but how long will it take you to send in your material, you think?
I don't know. What do you think?
3 weeks. I think we should have it at the most.
May I also ask, you guys have, I think Jason Chen, I'm gonna add Jason Chen on there, just in case I'm not in the office. Then one of us will look through that and help review it and keep the project moving along.
So when should we look at setting up our next meeting? End of March, beginning of April?
Yeah, like maybe like about a month from today. So like March 24th, maybe.
Or I'd say let's get into the week of the 28th, just to be clear, you have everything, right? Should we just set it up? The week of the 28th? 24th or 25th won't work for me anyway.
So yeah,
I'm looking that week and see who can make, I mean, after 3 o'clock on the 28th, or I have a lot of flexibility on the 30th. We want to
Yeah.
make sure our consultants are there. Larry, what's your availability?
both those dates.
The 28th is better than the 30th, or the 31st. I'm pretty open, like similar time as today.
Does 31st work for people?
Not for me.
Does the afternoon of the 28th work after at 3?
Yes.
I would say we should go for the first week.
Does that work for folks?
Yeah, that's fine.
So
it
we'll,
would be helpful that the sort of subcommittee has their priority list maybe 2 weeks before that meeting. So by the 14th, that way we have 2 weeks to review it, to provide input, and maybe give other considerations in terms of the prioritization that we should have in a discussion on the 28th.
so our next meeting then we have set for the 28th, and we'll send out an email about this from 3 to 4:30 on the 28th of March.
And we'll try to have our work done by the 14th, because you want those 2 weeks, right?
The more the better. I mean, I'll make it work, but obviously, if it bleeds a couple days here, there, I mean, it's not the end of the world, but maybe a target of the 14th would be great.
Before the Ides of March.
Good. I think this was productive. I think we covered a lot in this hour and a half, and we can start really, drilling down more at the next meeting and get work started.
Well, I hope that Danielle's baby will be able to walk on publicly owned paths in Kensington.
Sorry about that. We're in a cat in Oregon.
Well, John, I want to thank you for pulling this meeting together, and Robert. We've really been looking forward to this, and I think it's been a great meeting as well. So
yeah, and it's been productive because a lot of the groundwork that all of you have done really helps make it easier to move down here. So I mean, to move this along, and hopefully we can move this along as quickly as we can.
Yeah, and Lisa, if you can get me those materials from the Berkeley City Attorney's Office, that'd be helpful too.
I will scan whatever I have here.
Great.
For you.
So that time works for everybody, including Tom and Public Works and the community folks who are on here, right?
Yeah, I'm available then.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Nice meeting everyone. See ya.